The manager said, "You'll never be more than a server." Big mistake. They didn't look at me. I mean, not really. They walked past with that glazed-over gaze like I was part of the furniture, just another object inside that glossy glass building. Once I dropped a glove in the elevator. A blond guy from the tech department was standing less than a step away. He looked at me, then at the floor, and walked out without saying a word. That was the third time that week I told myself, "Stay calm, Brielle. You're here to survive, not to be acknowledged." Concordis Systems. The name alone smelled like big money. Every Monday morning, Teslas lined the marble driveway, and blonde girls in cream blazers floated through the badge scanners like the sky belonged to them. And me, I wore a gray badge facilities, janitorial staff, and carried a mop instead of a laptop. But that didn't really make me angry. Not exactly. What bothered me more was the way they assumed they were smarter than me, just because I held a bucket of water. The first day I mopped the tech office, I accidentally glimpsed a snippet of code they were debugging. Honestly, I only glanced for a few seconds, but my eyes landed on a loop that was missing a closing bracket. Such a basic mistake that I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. I didn't plan to get involved. Trust me, around here, if you're not the lead engineer, you're not allowed to speak. But I couldn't help myself. I scribbled a little note, folded it, and left it on the desk. Might be missing a closing bracket on line 143. I didn't sign it. No need. The next morning, I walked by and saw the entire tech team gathered around the desk. Kyle, the CEO's son, officially an engineer but self-appointed chief architect, was waving the paper like it was some kind of sacred artifact. "Who wrote this? Who left this note here?" he asked. No one responded. Kyle gave a half smirk. "Come on, probably just Ben screwing up and begging someone to fix it. Anyway, thanks, mystery person." He held the note up like he'd just cracked a major case. I stood 2 doors down holding my mop, and I saw it clearly. No one in that room ever considered that it might have been me. They didn't know about MIT, about the unfinished thesis I once wrote on unstructured AI behavior analysis. They didn't know that when I was 21, I was invited to present at the Machine Learning Conference in Denver, and that same year, my mother was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. While my classmates were applying for Google X, I was at the county hospital learning how to take blood pressure and cook broth. No, I didn't need them to know. But I wanted them to see it for themselves. In the days that followed, I kept mopping floors, kept silent, but I started paying closer attention to the lines of code on the whiteboard whenever I worked near the team meeting area. One time, the network crashed. I heard them shouting in the panic room that the main firewall just exposed an unencrypted TCP port. I knew why. It was in the very module Kyle had written last week, something I had seen but wasn't allowed to touch. I didn't fix it. I wasn't permitted to. But I left a short note in the system log file. Just a few lines, no name, no trace. The next morning, the system was up again. Kyle patted a brown-haired developer on the shoulder and declared I found the bug. Good thing I double-checked. I shook my head and smiled, not in anger. Because this time, I knew for sure someone else had seen it too. Her name was Laura Chen, a senior cybersecurity engineer, quiet, always listening to podcasts and never erasing the whiteboard. That morning, as I walked past the tech room, she looked up at me. Not for long, but long enough that her gaze carried a question. Was it you? I didn't say anything. I just smiled and kept pushing the mop. I was still a janitorial staff member, but someone had started questioning what that really meant. That day began like any other. The faint scent of bleach, the sharp click of high heels on marble floors, and the sputtering hiss of the coffee machine in the tech kitchen. But something felt different. Not from me, from them. Kyle was pacing the hallway with his iPad held upside down, muttering something about second-tier encryption freezing up. He wasn't wearing that usual half-smirk. His face looked tight, his collar slightly wrinkled like he hadn't slept all night. Meanwhile, Laura sat alone in the corner of the room, eyes locked on her screen, twirling her pen like she was waiting for something to reveal itself. I kept mopping the fourth-floor corridor. The tech wing had 4 security cameras I knew because I'd studied the system's maintenance diagram, but in the auxiliary cloud room, the blind spot between equipment cabinet 12 and the backup server was where the cameras couldn't reach. And that's exactly where 3 days earlier I had discovered a strange code fragment, an API call to an unregistered node. That wasn't supposed to happen unless someone was trying to open a back door. I didn't think twice. I went home, powered up my old computer, logged into my private sandbox VM, and rebuilt the code. Confirmed. It was a heartbeat injection, a sophisticated technique designed to silently track signals within a system without being detected. I had once written a paper on this method for my graduate class at MIT. The professor dismissed it as too paranoid to be real. Turns out reality's worse than theory. I didn't tell anyone. I wrote a temporary patch, disguised it as a system diagnostic request, and deployed it using a guest account I'd obtained, while fixing the HR department's printer 2 weeks earlier. A few lines of code, one sleepless night. And by morning, the system had stabilized. I showed up at Concordis with dark circles under my eyes and my mother's old scarf, just like every other day. But this time, Laura was standing at the entrance to the tech wing. She didn't say anything when I passed, just gave me a small nod. A nod that made my heart pound faster than it should have. That day, Kyle called an emergency meeting. I happened to walk past the conference room just as he slammed his hand on the table. No one touched that code, and it fixed itself. That's impossible. He looked around the room, clearly expecting someone to speak up. No one did. I stood just outside, mop in hand, and heard Laura speak softly. Maybe? No one in here fixed it. The entire room went dead silent for 3 seconds. A few hours later, while I was cleaning the equipment storage room downstairs, Laura appeared unexpectedly. She didn't say much, just sat beside me and handed me a coffee cup. I made it a bit bitter, but I figured you'd prefer that over fake sweetness. I took it and smiled faintly. Then she asked, "Was it you?" I looked at her. No confirmation, no denial, but my eyes said enough. Laura nodded like she didn't need anything more. Next time she said, "If you find something, let me be the next to know." Then she stood and left, leaving me and a cup of coffee so bitter it melted the worry in my chest. But what I didn't expect was that I wasn't the only one who knew the system was still being monitored. That night, I received an anonymous email. Just one sentence. "Not everyone wants the system patched. Be careful." Sent from a proxy IP outside Austin. For the first time in years, I felt fear. Not for myself, but for what I had fixed. For the trace I had left behind. The next morning in the parking lot, Kyle walked past me, brushing against my shoulder, and dropped his phone. I bent down to pick it up. His screen was still open to a tab, a hacker forum. Topic: bypass internal behavioral trackers in financial infrastructures. I couldn't be sure, but my stomach tightened. The opening description sounded familiar. I handed the phone back to him without a word. But this time I let my eyes linger a second longer. Kyle looked at me as if really seeing me for the first time and furrowed his brow slightly. That night, I began backing up every patch, every log, and every code snippet onto a small USB drive I hid in the janitor's supply locker, next to the rags and gloves, because I knew there would come a day when the truth needed to be revealed. But not today. Today I was still the janitor. still mopping floors, still not on any executive list. But somewhere within those lines of code, I was building a shield around a system they didn't realize was rotting from the inside out. And this time I didn't just want to stay silent. I wanted them to trip over the very trap they had created. Monday, 10:03 a.m. An emergency meeting was called in room 12A, the executive war room, reserved for red-level situations like system-wide failures or internal investigations. I knew because I used to clean that room 3 times a week, but I had never once been allowed to sit in any of its chairs. That morning, Laura found me in the break area. No coffee, no introduction, just one sentence, "Come with me." I followed, still holding my mop bucket without asking a thing. She led me to the door of the meeting room, where every power figure at Concordis was gathered. The CEO, the Chief Technology Officer, board representatives, and of course Kyle, dressed in a navy blue suit, sitting upright like he was about to save the world. I turned to leave, but Laura stopped me. "They need to hear it," she said. "From you." My heart skipped. I thought I was meant to stay in the shadows. Turns out the lights had been waiting for me. As I stepped in, the room fell into a strange silence. At first, their eyes didn't register who I was, just the janitor. But when Laura placed a black USB drive on the table and said, "She's the one who stopped the internal breach last week," the air cracked like broken glass. Kyle shot up. "What you mean?" "Her," he pointed at me like I had just emerged from the basement. "This is absurd." Laura didn't respond. She opened the file. Code appeared on the main screen, clean, precise, annotated, explaining how a heartbeat injection had been detected, how it transmitted signals via a dummy API, and how it had been quietly patched and logged in detail. All of this came from a guest account, Laura said. And today I confirm it belongs to Brielle Thomas. Every eye turned to me. Kyle laughed. "I don't know where she stole that from, but anyone can copy code." "I mean, you couldn't have written that," I interrupted. For the first time, my voice filled a room I used to bow down in to wipe dust off chairs. "I know because I've read your master's thesis on behavioral security. And I also know this code goes beyond anything you've ever written because it builds directly on my MIT research presented in 2017. No one laughed. Kyle froze. His eyes shifted. His lips moved. But no words came. I pulled a folded document from my pocket, a technical paper titled Decentralized Behavioral Injection, with my name on it. I placed it next to the performance board Kyle had proudly shown off that very morning. "I was a PhD researcher in behavioral AI," I said. "But my mother was diagnosed with late-stage heart failure. I left the program to care for her. After that, returning wasn't easy, especially after this company reevaluated my application." I looked toward the CEO. One board member whispered, "Didn't we reject Brielle's application?" In 2020, another pulled up a file. "Yes, but the resume didn't list her full academic credentials. I didn't submit the full CV," I said. "I needed work, any work, even janitorial." Silence. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the CEO, Mr. Bernard, asked gently, "Why didn't you say anything? You could have reapplied." "You could have. I don't need a title to prove who I am," I answered. "I need truth to be recognized, not a job title." Kyle stood again. "What are you trying to do? Steal credit from me?" "She just tweaked some code and now I'm not trying to do anything," I said, meeting his gaze. "You did it to yourself by faking skills and claiming credit that wasn't yours." "I just fixed an error." "You exposed yourself." That's a logic flaw. It was the first time I saw Kyle, the CEO's son, the man who once ignored me, in an elevator, utterly speechless. The CEO stood, looked at me, then at Laura. "I want an independent investigation," he said. "And, Brielle, I sincerely apologize. I didn't respond. I simply nodded the same quiet nod Laura once gave me in the break room. Silent, but thunderous. As I stepped out, a few young engineers stood frozen in the hallway. They looked at me like they'd just witnessed something impossible. One stammered, "Ma'am." "You really?" I smiled. "I just clean floors. But sometimes when I'm done, I notice the stains others overlook." That day I returned to the maintenance room, still holding my mop, but I knew from that moment on no one would dare call me just a janitor. 3 days after that fateful meeting, Kyle Winters, head of product and beloved son of the CEO, was suspended indefinitely. The internal report confirmed he had accessed unauthorized security forums and used code from unverified sources while claiming credit for it. A few financial partners sent emails demanding explanations. Concordis's stock dipped slightly, but inside the company, those numbers meant nothing compared to the psychological fallout trust had cracked. And me, I received an email with a subject line that simply read, "Let's talk Bernard Winters." I didn't respond because I didn't need to talk. I needed action. But the next morning, Laura came to the maintenance wing holding 2 cups of coffee and said, "He's in the small conference room. Alone." I nodded. Not because I bowed to power, but because I knew I now stood in a place where I could say what others wouldn't dare to. The conference room was colder than I remembered. Bernard Winters, the silver-haired CEO in a gray sweater, stood up and offered his hand. I shook it. "No, Bo. No, thank you for coming." We just looked each other in the eye. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not just for what my son did, but for the fact that this whole system was blind." I sat down, arms crossed. Apology is a starting point. But I don't need to be rewarded. I don't need a consulting title. I don't need a corner office. He frowned. "Then what do you want?" I placed a folder on the table, thick, neatly bound in a black cardstock cover. Title: Proposed Equity Program, Concordis Access Pathways Initiative. We've screened out hundreds of applicants at the submission stage just because they didn't go to the right school, didn't have the right connections, didn't fit the company culture. So now I want a program that opens a door for people who've been janitors, part-time clerks, veterans, single mothers, community college students, anyone with potential but no path. He opened the first page and skimmed the objectives: internal scholarship fund for 15 candidates per year, mentorship pairing between engineers and non-traditional applicants, 6-month training packages with real advancement trajectories, independent skill assessments that don't rely on degrees. "I'm not asking you to sign today," I said. "I'm asking, do you dare change how your company hires?" Bernard sat in silence for a moment. Then he picked up a pen, wrote across the cover page, "In review with intent," and signed his name. "This isn't for you," he said. "It's because we owe something to so many others whose names we never knew." I stood, and before I left, I turned and said something I didn't expect to hear coming from my own mouth. "Your son may hate me, but make sure those who come after him know that Concordis wasn't saved by a genius, just a janitor who knew what was right." That day, an internal company-wide email announced the launch of a new initiative, Concordis Access Pathways, inspired by an unexpected hero. I didn't take any official position. I still signed a temp contract, but I was invited to speak at the new hire onboarding. A young guy asked me, "Are you planning to be the next CTO?" I smiled. "No. I just want to keep cleaning the things that matter more than dust." 6 months after that day, the internal bulletin of Concordis posted a short announcement: Kyle Winters returns as a technical assistant at the Orientation Training Center. No fanfare, no welcome back event. Just a single line of information with a photo of him sitting among new interns holding a whiteboard, eyes downcast. I wasn't surprised. They had to give him a chance to make things right. I had no intention of teaching him a lesson. Time would take care of that for me. But one Friday afternoon in the third-floor break room, while I was sipping chamomile tea and reviewing next year's scholarship program draft, Kyle walked in. No sarcasm, no raised chin. He stood in front of me like a student who knew he had turned in his paper late. "Can we talk?" His voice was so quiet I almost didn't catch it. I closed the notebook. "I'm listening." He exhaled. "I'm not here to defend myself. I know I was wrong, but I've thought about it a lot, about you, about how you could have destroyed me and didn't." I said nothing. I wanted to hear it all. The thing that made me feel the worst, he continued staring into the air just past my shoulder, was that I never believed someone like you could be smarter than me. Not because you weren't brilliant, but because I was never taught to believe that was possible. I blinked, not angry, just quiet. "Why didn't you bring me down when you had the chance?" he asked. The question fell like a stone into still water. I answered after a pause. "Because I don't need to step on others to stand tall. I just need people to see who they really are and know they need to change." Kyle nodded. A nod with no defense, no mask. "You'll never forgive me, will you?" I smiled gently like a spring breeze. "I'm not the one holding the key to your exit." "You are." Kyle turned to leave, then hesitated. He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I made this in the new mentor workshop. Not sure if it's too much." He placed it on the table and walked away. I opened it. A metal pin engraved with 3 words, "No title needed." I kept it. Not as a keepsake, but because it reminded me some people, even after falling, can still rise if they learn to see themselves through new eyes. Now, every Monday morning at the Concordis Orientation Center, part of the opening session is dedicated to telling the story of a janitor who protected the company's entire system without anyone knowing her name. The storyteller doesn't mention me by name. They simply call me the gatekeeper. Because that's what I chose. I didn't need a stage. I only needed the system to be patched, the door to be opened, and for a new generation to enter, not by luck, but by merit. One day, a Haitian intern approached me while I was standing in the hallway. "I heard you used to clean here. Is that true?" I nodded. "It's true." He stood silent for a moment, then said, "I think if you could do it, maybe I have a chance too." I looked him straight in the eyes. "No, you don't have a chance because of me. You have a chance because you deserve one. I just do the work to make sure no one puts out that light again." And as I left the company that evening, I walked past the gold plaque outside the engineering hall. Among the names of founders, investors, and scientists, a small new plate had recently been added. It bore a single sentence: "Justice does not begin with who gets chosen, but with who gets seen." I paused for a few seconds. Not long. Then kept walking. I no longer carried a mop, but I was still cleaning something bias. Some people pass through our lives quietly like shadows, yet leave a deeper mark than those who always shout. Brielle's story reminds us that human worth isn't defined by titles, degrees, or the doors we enter, but by how we confront injustice with dignity and silent courage. In a world still riddled with quiet prejudice, where eyes glance right through those deemed not good enough, Brielle chose not to shout to be heard. She chose to act quietly, precisely, without the spotlight, and let the truth speak for itself. This is also a reminder for anyone who's ever been overlooked or underestimated. True gold fears no fire. Wherever you are in life, whether holding a mop or writing code, you matter, and you have every right to rise. But remember, rise not for revenge, but to open the door for the next person, so that one day the world won't ask, "Who is she?" but simply nod and say, "She was right." If this story moved, you don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? Tell us because your story might be exactly what someone out there needs to hear. Hit like if you support content rooted in humanity like this, and subscribe to Talk Story so you won't miss the next powerful and thought-provoking chapter. Wishing you a peaceful day where kindness, fairness, and true worth always find their place, even if it takes the long way to get there.